Today is September 26th, 2017. My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview with Willard Parish in Broken Arrow, and you live in Bristow, Oklahoma.
Yes, sir.
Sir, where were you born?
In Bristow.
Bristow.
Born at in my grandmother's house, as a matter of fact.
And when's your birthday?
Be June 30th, 1941.
1941. Who's your father?
His name was Claude, C-L-A-U-D-E, Parish.
Mm-hmm. And your mother?
Her name was Elnor, E-L-N-O-R. Her maiden name was Ford.
Ford. Okay. Did you go through school in Bristow?
Yes, sir. Graduated in 1959 and went the whole 12 years there in Bristow on the same block, as a matter of fact.
Who was your favorite teacher?
Oh gosh, that'd be hard to say because there were several of them I liked. Probably Mr. Stiles.
Why was he your favorite?
Well, he actually I had 3 years of drafting, and he was our drafting instructor, and he also up until my senior year did the wood shop. You know, that's back when high schools had shops and things like this, which apparently they don't have anymore now.
In high school, what did you do for recreation?
Well, I excuse me, I played a little football. I wasn't one of the, jocks. I was more or less the blocking dummy during practice during the week and the bench warmer game day. But I did that, I guess, up till about my junior year. And I don't know, since I wasn't getting to play any, I just kind of lost interest in it,
What type of work your father do?
He did seismograph work. He was a surveyor actually started out what they called a jug hustler. Then he went to the dynamite man. And then he went to surveying. And he was a surveyor for years for old SSC, Seismograph Service Corporation. It used to be here in Tulsa. And he finally worked his way up as party manager and did that until he retired.
Yeah. When did you get your first car?
I got my first car in the fall of 1958. It was an old flathead six-cylinder 1946 Ford four-door sedan. And I drove that until the spring of '59. And I had a chance. My uncle was going to sell my cousin's car, and it was a 1950 Mercury. And he let me have it for $100. So I bought that old Mercury, and I wished I still had it.
Now, did you live in Bristow?
Yes, sir.
What was your address in Bristow?
Well, the house that I have now was my grandmother and my granddad's house. My aunt and uncle bought it, and then I bought it from them.
Okay.
And while Dad was overseas in World War II, we lived there with my grandparents. Then when he came home, we moved into what they used to call the Veterans Apartments. And in April of 1953, Mom and Dad bought their house. And I tell everybody I can remember them sitting at the table and Dad saying, "Elnor, I just don't know how in the world we're going to afford $55 a month house payment." Excuse me. But Mr. Stone built the house, and they bought it for $8,500, and they lived there till the day they died.
Was it a frame house?
Yeah, it was. It was a 3-bedroom frame house, and then later on, Dad had it bricked.
Okay. What did you do after high school?
Went to work on the seismograph crew, just kind of following in my dad's footsteps. Actually, during the summer, I used to work on them, you know, make a little spending money for when I went back to school and stuff.
What'd you do with a seismograph crew?
Started out jug hustling like my dad did, and then I also was a rodman for the surveyor. When I got drafted, I was a kind of what they called observer, junior, what they called a junior observer. Matter of fact, a junior observer on a seismograph crew, these guys is getting out of college. I can't now remember what titles they had, but anyway, they were mostly the junior observers to get field experience. And I was the only junior observer on the crew that didn't have college education.
Now, what does a rod man do?
Well, he helps the surveyor, like they lay out what they call a seismic line, and then you've got a rod, and you hold the rod up for them to do elevations and things, and they compute all this in then and try to figure out where a good spot was then to put up a big rig and drill for oil.
Okay. So you working seismograph for oil companies, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, usually the seismograph crews were usually contracted out by oil companies. Like when Dad was in California, they were working for Shell Oil out there.
Now, did you go to California?
No,
With your dad?
no. When they were in California is when I was in Vietnam.
Okay.
And no, mostly I just around Oklahoma, western Oklahoma, Panhandle of Texas, Kansas, western Kansas,
Right.
just kind of in this area.
Now, when did you get your draft notice?
Oh, well, it was probably sometime in November of '63. I had to report the 28th day of November of '63.
It said inducted November 29th, 1963.
29th? I thought it was 28th.
Okay.
Well, okay. Oh, I know. It was 28th when I went down and had to spend the night city, and then the next day's when, I guess so.
At the Hotel Black.
Yes. Yep.
Been there.
Down on Robinson.
Yeah. What do you think when you got your draft notice?
Well, being 22 and single and running around, man, they just gonna cheat me. Well, not supposed to cheat, but mess me around out of 2 good years of my running.
Where'd you go for your basic training?
Down at Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Fort Polk.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about basic.
Oh, wasn't a whole lot to say, just regular basic. We went down there, like I said, in November, and we weren't down there hardly any time, and they closed the base down for Christmas holiday, so I wasn't down there very long till I got to come home. Of course, that messed me up, because then I didn't get to go home again for a year, and I remember we got done in February, and I just remember it didn't snow, but it was just an old, cold, rainy, misty rain. And anyway, like I said, we got done there in February of '64. And I've got, my MOS was 112, which was heavy weapons infantry, and I got sent to Fort Benning.
Now, what type of training did you have in basic?
Well, we had, enough hand-to-hand combat to get you hurt. Rifle track, gas mask, just stuff like that. When I was in, we had the old M14s then. And
What about bivouac?
well, I don't remember going too much on bivouac in basic. Now, when I got down to Benning, we went a lot. But
Okay. I didn't ask, where were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
I was in Norman, Oklahoma. I had a buddy from Bristol had drove down the night before, and I had a hotel room down there where I was working seismograph, and he spent the night. Well, the next day I went and got my final check, and I went to this grocery store, and you had to go to a courtesy desk then to cash your checks. And this little girl come up that worked in this grocery store just bawling her eyes out, and said, they shot him, they shot him. And the store manager said, shot who, She said, they shot the president. And of course then Don, he took me back to my hotel room, and I was waiting for my mom to come pick me up. And we were, that evening, then we were going to go on to Dumas, Texas, to my aunt's house. My dad was in Wyoming. He was going to come and meet us to see me before I went into the service the next Friday. Yeah. And so, of course, then I got back, and I had a little 19-inch black and white TV, and I turned on and started watching old Walter Cronkite. And that's when they come on and said that he had died, which I figured with a headshot, it was more likely, that was going to be the outcome of it. And like I said, we went out there, and I remember the following Sunday, we were having dinner at my aunt's house, and I took my plate, filled it up, went to the living room, and I was watching, and then that's when I saw Ruby shoot Oswald. Yeah. And I said, hey, some guy just shot Oswald. And I said that, and I've always had my thoughts about it, about it just seemed like, okay, I can't see a guy with a scope, with a bolt-action rifle, get off 3 accurate shots like that and that fast. Mm-hmm. Because, when you look through a scope, you're looking like this. And when that rifle, and then you're going to have to find your target again. And
The woman in the red dress lives in southern Oklahoma. She's across the street, and there are no people there. And she wanted to go over there and said, no, you can't go there. Why not? Well, she went over there anyway.
Yeah.
And she said she heard a bullet go by, and that's when she was on the ground. She's on the Zapruder film on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I wonder why they wouldn't let people go over there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Like I said, I don't have any answers for it or anything, but I just find it, I don't care. I've fired weapons, and I hunted with my granddad when I was a kid and stuff, and I know when you're got a scope and you're doing a bolt action, that's going to pull you away from, and like I said, I don't have any answers, but I just find it amazing that somebody could get that 3 rounds off that fast and that accurate.
Yes. So was Fort Benning your AIT?
That was my AIT.
Infantry?
Mm-hmm, heavy weapons.
How did AIT compare to basic?
Well, it was pretty nice because we got to fire different weapons. Mm-hmm. And my favorite that we fired was the 106 recoilless. And one reason being, you could see your targets and see what you're shooting at. Mm-hmm. The mortars are going at live fire round, or range and firing live rounds, and the FOs would come back, hey, nice shooting, direct hit. Fine, what were we shooting at? As I said, at the end of the day, all the charges that we would pull off the mortar rounds, and we'd dig a pit and put them in there, And then at the end of the day, we'd light that and all that. I said that was the most exciting part of the day, and this was one of the reasons why I went to my section sergeant about. We had all the FOs were E5s then, and we had
Ford Observer.
yeah, Ford Observer, and we went to, or I went to my section sergeant and asked him about becoming a FO. So he said, well, we'd try me out. So at night, I'd go down to the cadre rooms and get with them, and they'd teach me how to read the millage lines, you know, and the binoculars, and they'd, you know, show me out on the live fire range. First thing they let me do was set up what they call a reference point, which you set that up and then you direct your fire from the reference point. And after a while, then they finally let me start, you know, trying to call in missions, and their theory was if you hit your target by the third round, that was pretty good shooting.
Now you say it's 106 recoilless?
Yeah.
What is a recoilless rifle?
Well, they've got like a 50 caliber mounted on top, and I can't. And you got your wheel here that you traverse with, you know, and another wheel you raise. But in the middle of the traverse, there's a solid round one. And I can't remember now if you pushed in and then pulled out, or if you pulled out and then pushed in, but it seemed to me like you pushed it in, and that fired a tracer round from that 50 caliber, and if it hit your target, you were on target, then you just pulled out and then fired the 106. Well, the breech on it's got all kinds of holes, and your backblast comes out those holes. As a matter of fact, the first day on the range, they set up a wooden ammo box to show you why you shouldn't be standing behind it when they fired. And it obliterated that wooden crate.
Yeah.
But like I said, I like that. We did fire, well, everybody called, somebody said something about bazooka and that AI. I said, this is a 3.5 rocket launcher. we got to fire those. Then we fired the old M79 grenade launcher. I kind of liked firing that one, but my 106 was my favorite to fire, you know. And I was trying to remember. It seemed like there was something else. Oh, the Law.
Yes.
We
Light
got
anti-tank weapon.
I can't. I you know, that's been over 50 years ago, and I can't remember now all the things about it. But anyway, I was in headquarters company then, and when we got out of AIT, it seemed like it was the same company, but we became Delta Company. And Delta at that time had the 381 mortar sections, and we had the recon platoon, and then we, 4.2 mortars. We still had those. Never got to ever fire 4.2, but we still had a 4.2 mortar squad. So I was trying to remember, excuse me, seemed like it was in July of about 64 when Colonel Moore came and took over the battalion. Well, when he took over the battalion, then, well, I guess it was after we did the helicopter concept testing against the 82nd Airborne that he changed us over, because when we were in South Carolina, we still had Captain Sproles, which was Delta Company, but in the fall of 64, well, let me go back. We became the 2nd 23rd Infantry in the 2nd Infantry Division, and we occupied an area there was like 4 areas of Benning. There was Main Post, Sand Hill, Kelly Hill, and then Harmony Church. Harmony Church was the furthest out, and that's where they had the 11th Air Assault testing. They had taken the old 11th Airborne and made it into this helicopter concept deal. Well, they, in the fall of '64, was fixing to go to South Carolina and do this test for 3 months against the 82nd Airborne out of Fort Bragg, I believe it was. And so they were a little under strength. Well, since Kelly Hill was next to Harmony Church, the 2nd, 23rd, and the 1st and the 38th, we got loaned out to them and to test all this out. Anyway, then when we came back, that's when Moore decided he wanted light mortar sections to go to each line company. So one went to Alpha, one went to Bravo, one I was in went to Charlie Company. And then I had Captain Edwards as company commander. And so, like I said, when we came back, we just wasn't really doing anything. And I asked my Sergeant Matos what the deal was, and he said, well, they're still evaluating all this test that we did. Then the next thing I know, hey, we're going to become the 1st Cav Division. At the time they were in Korea, so I thought, hey, I'm probably going to get to go to Korea and freeze my rear end off. Because I'd talked to guys that had been in Korea. Mm-hmm. And basic, a lot of our first aid film was showing guys, most casualties were frostbite, you know, and I remember them seeing those films and thinking, man, oh man, I pity those guys that had to serve there. But anyway, we just, like I said, exchanged patches. And so we became 1st Battalion, 7th Cav. And 1st and the 38th, they became 2nd Battalion, 7th Cav. Mm-hmm. And those poor guys are the ones that got chewed up at LZ Albany. Because I'm sorry to say, their battalion commander, that's Colonel McDade, he had had no battlefield command. Mm-hmm. And they relieved us at LZ X-ray. They were going to come in with some B-52s and carpet bomb at Chupong, Memphis. And the difference between him and Hal Moore, if we were going to march from LZ X-ray to LZ Albany, he would have had gunships and artillery walk that up ahead of us. McDade didn't. He got them all strung out. Well, at the top of the column, they caught a couple of North Vietnamese. So he calls all the company commanders forward. And they tell everybody just, you know, and this Captain Forster, he was the 1st and the 5th attached to him. And his bunch was at the end of the column. And as he said, that he and his 2 RTOs were walking up this line, and guys were laying around, you know, smoking, joking, and I'm thinking, hey guys, you know, this is not no time to be. And sure enough, they were kind of lined out like a snake. And about the time all the company commanders got up to the front there, then the VC, or actually the North Vietnamese regulars, they just come in and hit them right in the middle. And, well, gosh, dog. It was Howard K. Smith's son. I can't remember his first name now. He wound up being a news reporter for ABC News, and Jack Smith, and he was in Charlie Company in the 2nd and the 7th, and he got wounded. And
Now, where's the LB Albany? Where's that located?
Well, the like we were here, and this Chupong Massif's here, and then the Cambodian border, and LZ Albany was up here.
Okay. Down by Cambodia, then.
Well, it was almost north of where we were at.
Okay.
And I can't remember now, but I just remember that a lot of times they would go over into Cambodia and sit there and lob mortars back, but we couldn't fire back because I said I felt like several times that when we were out there in some of those skirmishes and we got along that border line and stuff, that if we'd crossed it, we were going to have guys in black and white striped shirts run out there and blow their whistles, say Americans off sides, you know.
Yeah.
And well, and some of the skirmishes we'd get into, I remember we'd fight, you know, and then it'd die down, and then here come mama sons and their kids and stuff, you know, and they have these baskets, and they'd have this Tiger beer and Coca-Cola and stuff. It was like halftime, man, you know. It was crazy, man. It was crazy.
Now, when did you go to Vietnam?
We left in August of '65.
How'd you travel to Vietnam?
On troop ship.
Tell me about you left the States from where?
Charleston, South Carolina.
Tell me about the trip to Vietnam.
Well, wasn't much to say while we was in the Atlantic, except go up the bow of the ship and watch the flying fish, you know, try to get out of the way. We went down between Haiti and Cuba, and then, very interesting though, going through the Panama Canal. That was, and on the Atlantic side, I mean, there wasn't nothing except military installation. But man, when you come out on the Pacific side, they was all kinds of fancy resort-looking places, you know, and more sea life than we had ever seen in the Atlantic side. As a matter of fact, we were out there one day on the ship on the rail, and it was like if you've ever passed a school ground and the kids are off at a distance, you could hear them, but you couldn't make out what they. Well, anyway, we started hearing all this racket, and it was these porpoises. And it's just, like I said, it sounded like a bunch of kids, and they come alongside the ship, and they'd come up out of the water and turn and get up on their tails and go away from the. It was a show, man. It was.
What ship you on?
USNS Rose. And had a whale bump the ship, but like I said, over on the Atlantic side, and I don't know, it just, to me, the Atlantic side was just dirty looking, but the Pacific, it was, we weren't supposed to stop in Hawaii, but we had a kid had tack appendicitis, so we pulled in the harbor there at Honolulu, and they run a little ship out there and unloaded him and took him to shore. And I remember it took us 10 days to go from Charleston around to Long Beach, and from Long Beach to Queen Yan took us like 20 days.
How'd you pass the time on the trip?
Oh, a lot of times we'd get our weapons out, you know, and clean them. We'd do some calisthenics, you know, out on the deck of the ship. And then we hit that tail end of that typhoon that was hitting Japan, and they would tell you not to get out on the deck and stuff, but down in that hole, and all those guys sick and everything. And I the more I thought that I was going to get sick, the more I felt I was going to. But I got up on deck in the fresh air and stuff, and we were, you know, being tossed around. And like I told somebody, it wasn't so much this or this, but it was the combination, you know. And we had a lot of guys that got sick, but thank the good Lord, I got queasy, but I never did really get sick.
What about your quarters in the ship? Where'd you sleep?
Down in the hole, toward the, what you call the back end of the ship, the
Fantail?
Yeah, fantail. And your racks, they were about 5 high. And when you got in, you either got in on your back or you got in on, because you didn't have room to turn over. But I remember another thing that I didn't like about down there is when that typhoon hit, because when the back end of the ship would come up out of the waves, those big old screws, you could hear them go, you know, and that was deafening. And so anyway, I rode it out and made it through. And
what were you told to do in case the ship was sinking?
I don't remember us ever being told what to do on the ship.
Now, what kind of ship was the Rose?
Just a little old troop carrier. I think it was designed for about 3,000. We had like 5,000 on it. But I do remember one time they had us get our duffel bags out of storage, and I remember this one kid, he hooked his toe and was going to throw it up on his shoulder, and about that time the ship rolled, and he went toward the rail, and he dropped his duffel bag, and it was fluff. And he turned around to the sergeant and he said, "Well, what do you want me to do, Sarge?" He said, "Well, I don't want you to jump in and go after it."
How were the meals on the ship?
Do what?
How were the meals on the ship?
Oh, they were all right. I mean, they wasn't, you know, any cuisine. But, that was another thing too. When the ship was rolling, watch your stuff go.
Yeah.
But no, I like I said, that 30 days on ship, I found out I wasn't cut out to be no sailor. As a matter of fact, my younger brother quit college in '67, and he was talking about joining the Marine Corps. I said, "Are you crazy?" He said, "What?" I said, "Man, you get out of boot camp Marine Corps, they'll have you thinking you're indestructible." And I said, "And I guarantee you'll go straight to Vietnam." I said, if you're gonna quit college, Larry, and join something, I said, get into something in the military that will get you some schooling that you can use when you get out. He said, "Well, like what?" I said, "Well, they tell me the 2 best branches for schooling is the Air Force and the Navy. But I will tell you, that 30 days I spent on ship, I was not cut out to be no sailor." And I said, and looking back, what I wished I'd have done was like Bill Fuller did in '57 when I graduated in '59, joined the Air Force, put in 20 years there. I said, then when Bill got out, he put in 20 years at the post office, and he retired with a double whammy. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So Larry joined the Air Force, and of all the guys that I've known that went in the Air Force, they always went down to, and I'm terrible on names anymore, the base down at San Antonio.
Kellyfield?
No,
Lackland?
Lackland. They always went to Lackland for basic training. Well, Larry went to Amarillo, and he got out of basic, and he came home for a little while, and then they sent him down to Wichita Falls, Shepherd, I think, down there for his training. And of course, he's home about
What's your brother's name?
Larry.
Larry. Okay.
And he, when he got done there, they sent him down to England Air Force Base, down to Alexandria, Louisiana. Well, at the time, my mom and dad was working seismograph crew down there, had a little house trailer they pulled, and they were at Pineville, which is just across the river. So Larry stayed down there with them, and then he got sent to Benoit. And he put in a year at Benoit, came back, and then they went to send him to Laredo. And my dad's sister and her family lived at Pearsall, Texas, about 60 miles from. So on the weekends, then he'd go to Pearsall.
Do you recall the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
Well, just, what I read and stuff. At the time, we weren't paying any attention to, I wasn't into world news and all that and everything, being the age I was and single.
So you said you landed at Quinyon?
Yes, sir.
You landed in Vietnam. What do you do?
Well, like I said, we got our duffel bags and went down this, I called it stair, but they called it a ladder, into an LST, and then we took off, and like I said, on the way into shore, we kept putting these John Wayne Beachhead movies, like Iwo Jima and all that stuff, and and scared to death. And then that ramp, well, we felt a bump, with the shore, and then chug up on the shore there, and then they dropped that ramp, and old sergeant was hollering, go, go, go. And like I said, I ran out, and the first thing I saw was a big Connex container with a couple of guys up on top playing cards, and that was my beachhead. But they loaded us up on Chinook helicopters, flew us up to Ankh, and for a while, what we did was cleared out what they call the picket line, or the green line, the green line. We had to go out anywhere there was a termite hill or an ant hill or anything that they could have cover. And some of the funnest things, I remember they had these black ants, and they had these red ants, and they hated each other. So we'd get into one of them ant hills, and we'd get a shovel full of them black ants and go over and put them in with the red ants and watch them fight. But most everybody, that was our first experience, was being out on the green line to get you, The 9th Cav, Colonel Stockton, actually in the movie Apocalypse Now, Robert Duvall had that cavalry Stetson on it. That was patterned after Stockton, and they somehow got a mule on ship. It's Maggie the mule. Well, poor old Maggie, the first night we were there, she got shot and killed. And we had a guy that was.
So who shot Maggie?
Nobody knows. But we did have one guy get shot. But he didn't. It was kind of his fault. He didn't identify himself. And of course, like I said, everybody, when you're first there, you're scared to death, and any sound, and you challenge, and nobody, I remember one of the first deals that we went out on, there was a kid in Bravo Company. He drowned in a river. But their first out deal we went down to, well, we stayed back posing for this painting here on Time Magazine.
Yeah.
And then our outfit went down to what they call the Happy Valley.
And where's Happy Valley?
Now that was down by the coastline, back towards Quinyon.
Yeah.
And it was more like your palm trees and bananas and all that stuff. It's more like the tropicals down there. But only thing we run into there is what I call the VC gorillas. And you know something's wrong when you go in a village and there's nothing but women and kids and old men. You don't see any young men. And but what they would do, they knew when we was coming, and they would pull out. Well, they would leave like a grenade, or they would leave like an AK-47. More harassment stuff. And it wasn't in my company, but it was in my battalion. First known kill was a 12-year-old girl, which the press back here, but see, people back here, they don't realize a 9-year-old kid can kill you just as dead as a 39-year-old man. And they wrote this, but the only thing they omitted, that the girl was shot and killed after she threw a grenade in amongst 5 guys and killed 2 of them, wounded 3. But the press didn't, so, and it's hard for people to comprehend that stuff, that's what I've not seen it happen, but I've heard of accounts where, they would go into these hooches and they'd hear a baby crying, and of course first thing you do, you want to go in and pick the baby up. It's booby trapped. But people, like I said, they're back here going to school and to the proms and things like that, and are going out here and protesting and not got a clue what it's like to be there. I'm sorry, but I'm done with NFL football.
What was your job in Vietnam?
Well, I wound up a guy named Herman Hostetler. He was my squad leader. Well, on the ship, he come up and told me he wanted me to be his assistant squad leader. So we had this lieutenant, I'll not mention names, but he was fresh out of ROTC. Well, I'd been in the Army, quite some time, and Colonel Moore said that we could have our hair at least 3 inches on top if we had the white sidewalls. Well, when we got over to Charlie Company, we were kind of like the stepchildren with the line companies. So we got this lieutenant as our platoon leader. He gets up there and he's telling everybody that, gosh, well, we go to Vietnam, everybody in this outfit's going to have a haircut like his, which is what we call the fresh fish special. And I said, well, Colonel Moore said we could have our hair at least 3 inches, as long as we had white sidewalls. And it was more or less, his attitude was he didn't care what the battalion commander said. So I'm kind of kind of hard-headed and stubborn, and so the more he'd start riding me about my hair, the more I'd let it grow. Well, we were on ship, and I was standing there at the rail one day, and Sergeant Hostetler come up to me, and he said, "Parish, would you do me a favor?" I said, "Sure, Sarge, what's that?" He said, "Would you go get your haircut so Lieutenant so-and-so and get off my back about your hair?" And I said, "Yeah." And that was Hostetler. You know, if we had a bad detail or something, he'd come in and say, "Hey guys, we got," you know, but he'd jump in there and he'd ask you, you know, he said, "I'm asking you to help me." And, you know, everybody in that squad would bust their butts for him, you know. And, cause, you know, he earned our respect, and he gave us respect. That's kind of like the old man, Hal Moore. And, but anyway, so I go to the ship's barber and get my hair cut. Well, then we had those baseball caps. And I'm standing there on the deck, and I'm brushing the hair off my neck. I just noticed, you know, I sent somebody behind me, and I turned around, and it was, I don't want to say his name. But anyway, this lieutenant, he was up there kind of, he said, "I thought I told you to go get a haircut." I said, "Man, I just come from the barber shop getting a haircut." Well, he reached up and jerked my hat off my head, and oh, that just, and he's about a head taller than I was. And he's from Nebraska, and being me from Oklahoma, and OU in Nebraska, you know. But anyway, that just kind of got all over me. And he said, "It's not like mine." And I said, "No, sir, and it's not going to be like yours." I said, "Now, Colonel Moore's stateroom's right down here." I said, "If you want to go down here, we'll go down there and let him inspect my haircut." "Oh, no, we don't have to do that, you know." And so I said, "Well, then what's your problem?" And he looked, he said, "How old are you?" And of course, I was one of the old timers then. I was 24 then. I said, "I'm 24. He said, "Well, I'm only 22. You don't like taking orders from a man younger than you, do you?" I said, "You know what? If I considered him a man, I wouldn't care if he's 10 years old. You better watch out. You're supposed to respect me." I said, "No, sir. As a man, I don't have to respect you at all. Only thing I got to respect you is that little gold bar up there on your shoulder." And I said, "If you was any type of man, you'd strip that blouse. We'd step back here on the fantail, and we'll find out who the real man is." And he, "Oh, I'm not." And finally I said, "You know what? I've had enough. You don't get out of my face, I'm going to deck you right here." Well, he turned around and left. Well, a little bit later, Hostetler came back up, and he's kind of laughing. He said, "Well," he said, "I hear you had a little run-in with the lieutenant." I said, "Well, a little bit." I said, "Am I in trouble?" He said, "No." Said he was telling me about it, and he said, "Parish said if I didn't leave him alone, he was going to deck me." He said, I looked at him and said, "Well, sir, you better leave him alone then." But because of this lieutenant, our company XO, we were out, after you get used to the green line, about 6 miles out, they had what they called the picket line. And you'd go out there, you know, like 3, 4, 5 days, you know, however long. And so we would have sea rats in the morning and then noontime, but then in the evening, the XO and the fly sergeant would fly out those, what do they call them, Merrimacs, where you had the hot food.
Yeah, yes.
Is that what they called them?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, anyway, they flew hot chow out, and when they left and were going back to On K, another chopper flew into them and killed everybody on both choppers, you know. So we were back there at On K, and Sergeant Hostetler came up to me and he said, "Hey, Parrish," he said, I've had enough of so-and-so, you know," and he said, "I'm going to put in for that supply sergeant job." And I said, "Well, man, Sergeant, I hate to see you desert us," you know. He said, "Well, Thompson's going to be your new squad leader, and I've already told Thompson that to leave you as assistant squad leader." Okay. Well, yep, he got the supply sergeant job. Well, like what we would do, I would take about half our squad on one side of the chopper. Thompson would take them on the other side. And according to Major Crandall, who was one of the pilots, him and old Too Tall, that kept coming all night long up there, and during training on the chopper, they'd come in and hit on those skids and slide, and they'd count 3 and then lift off again, and you best be off there. But
Is that a Huey?
huh? On Huey, yeah. So we had, like I said, we went up in this Happy Valley, and we didn't find too much up there in this Happy Valley. Well, I remember we were one of the last bunch to leave out, and here come Colonel Moore. And I told him, I said, "Well, Colonel Moore, you not left yet?" He said, "No, son." He said, I don't leave till I make sure all my people are." And he's the last one to leave that area. Like, you know, in the movie, yeah, that's true. He was the first one to set foot on the ground and the last one to load on the chopper. And I remember we had one guy that was kind of unaccounted for, and we were like 3 hours being, you know, waiting to lift out because they couldn't find him. And they finally found him. So once they found him, he was accounted for, because, you know, and I don't know if you've seen the movie or not, but in the movie, he makes this speech at a...
That's the movie We Were Soldiers.
Yeah, he makes this speech, Mel Gibson, at kind of like a division parade, but it wasn't. Actually, it was like at a battalion reveille. And when we found out, and he talked to us, and it wasn't quite like the movie, but it was a deal where he said that he wanted to make a bargain, or not a deal with us. That's what it was. That he promised that he would leave, killed, wounded, or otherwise, everybody would come home. He'd leave nobody behind. And I ask the same of you. If I go down, you make sure I get home. So that was a deal between, and you know, and we were like his sons, really, in that battalion. And, you know, like I said, my dad's right here, and Moore's right about like that. And he was an outstanding leader. But when we came in to the LZ there in the Yaldrang, I'm on the right side of the chopper. We all unload. Thompson and this bunch unload. Well, I looked across the way there, and it was open field to the wood line. Wood line over here was the nearest. Well, Thompson's taking everybody going that way. So I said, well, come on. Well, if we'd have went across this way, we'd have ran into Battalion CP. Instead, we come this way, running toward the base of the mountain, the Chupam, where they were coming down at us. And for that biggest part of that first day, we were there pinned down, you know, and couldn't move. Before we left, instead of taking all the mortars, Moore said, we're going to be up there in a place where it's going to be hard to get supplies, So I want every other mortar squad to take their mortars. The ones that don't, backpack mortar ammo. So my squad, we had the backpack with mortar ammo. And here we are, pinned down, mortar rounds on my back and stuff. Well, some of the guys that got wounded from the line companies, they started bringing them out to the edge of the wood line there. And they had these big banyan trees and this tall elephant grass. And it was completely different than the Happy Valley with the tropical, area. But medevac wouldn't come in because it was a hot LZ. And old Major Crandall and his helicopter crews, if they saw you trying to get a wounded guy out to the chopper, they was just like ducks on a pond sitting there, and man, you hear ping, ping. But one time, me and Willard and old Coleman was carrying this guy out, and man, there was a loud pop that stung my ear. Matter of fact, I thought I'd been shot in the ear. And Coleman and Willard and the wounded guy went down, and I'm standing up, doing. Finally, Coleman jumps up and knocks me down. And so I said, well, okay, let's get this guy, And old Willard says, well, I can't make it. I said, what? He said, I'm being hit. Well, that's what that loud pop was. They'd shot him right down through there, right along the side of his boot, and it come out the bottom of his foot. So here we're trying to get this other guy and Bullard and crew chief on the helicopter. He jumps off and runs over and we get them all. They're gone. So basically, and then, of course, mortar squads don't have nothing. My basic issue weapon was a 45. That's all I had. So what I started doing, I got with old Sergeant Freeman. We called him Big Daddy Freeman. He weighed about 300 and some pounds. And so I started getting those wounded guys M16s and their ammo. We're sitting behind this big banyan tree, and he's got his little notebook out, and I'm having to read the serial number off this rifle, and he write down who his guy came from, and then who I'm giving it to, because he had to keep. And I thought, these guys getting shot and killed, and they're picking up their weapons anyway. So, okay, we get most of the wounded guys loaded up and all that and everything, and I'm thinking, all right, we've got all this mortar ammo. Where are the mortars set up? Nobody knew. So finally, one of the sergeants in the line company, he said, I don't know where the mortars are, but across the LZ over there behind that termite hill is where Moore's got the battalion CP set up. They'll know. So we had at that time a couple of these little AE-1 Sky Raiders coming in dropping these butterfly mines. And so I finally got all my guys together and got their backpacks and stuff, and I said, well, here's the deal. I said, when that first plane comes in and starts dropping his ordnance, I'll run across. If I make it, when the second guy comes in, y'all come across. I said, or we can all go together. Well, Coleman, he was a PFC, and he was from Chicago, and Coleman, he said, I said, or we can all go together when the second one comes in. Coleman said, we'll all go together. So I got everybody lined up. When that second one come in, started dropping his ordnance, we all hooked it across that LZ, and thank the good Lord, we all made it without a scratch. And first guy I run into was Sergeant Major Plumley, and told me where the mortars were. We got over there, and I finally found Sergeant Matos, and he said, you need to take your men and start digging foxholes, because we're going to have to pull our own defensive perimeter. I said, with what? We got nothing to, you know. Well, when I gave Coleman an M16, he gave me his 45. So that's how I wound up with two 45s. And so I got back there, and Coleman, for some reason, he always wanted to be with me. And anyway, we started digging a foxhole. Matos come and said, well, we got some more water and some more ammo coming in over the company CP. He said, you need to take some guys and go over there and get it. So I told Coleman to work on it and foxhole, and when I got back, I'd finish it. Make a long story short, when I got back, he'd already done it. And so it's starting to get kind of dusky dark then, and then that's when Matos and Sergeant Hewitt from Delta Company. Delta Company, they had turned into a weapons platoon. So they came around and they said they had some spare M60s, so they was going to, you know, bring one to beef up our area and kind of help fortify while we was having to pull our defensive perimeter. So they said, anybody here qualified with an M60? Yeah, I got it, and I was messing with it, and turned around to Coleman, and I said, is Hewitt and Matos left yet? And he said, yeah, why? And I said, well, let's figure out how to load this damn thing. He said, I said, I never touched one before. But I remember that night, it was fairly quiet except for those lobbing artillery over us over on the side of that mountain. Well, the next morning, Charlie Company was over here, then Delta, and then us, and then Alpha. And we could hear all, just about daylight, all kinds of commotion going on over there at Charlie Company. Well, then we heard guys at Delta Company holler, they're coming around, they're coming around. And I'm out there, and this foxhole is about knee deep. And I'm down on my knees, and I got this M60 up here. I got 145 here and 145 here. And I'm watching out to the front, and there was a termite mound out there, and of course, like I said, this elephant grass. Well, as I was looking, I could see this grass going down, you know, like somebody crawling in it. So Joe and them did a little better in the book, but I hollered, who's out there in them weeds? And nobody said anything. So I hollered again. Nobody said anything, so I turned around and called him, and I said, burn his ass. Well, at the time, those M16s, you fire them semi-automatic, they were fine. But you put it on full automatic, they'd jam every time. And Coleman shot once. And I said, put that on full automatic. He said, it's jammed. And I remember I looked back to and it was like, only way I can describe it, if you've seen these Disney movies where they show the ground and the ground starts coming up and then splits and then the stalk of the plant comes up and the bud and then it blooms, kind of like time-lapse. That's what it looked like out there in front of me. It's just like they were growing up out of this elephant grass. And I couldn't tell you much after that. I just remember it was really loud, and then all of a sudden it was like I was way off somewhere watching all this going on, and somebody turned the volume down. And I remember one time something come flowing through the air, and Sergeant Niemeyer from Delta Company, he was over next to us, and I just hollered grenade, and as I started getting down and Coleman started getting down in the foxhole, that thing went over and hit that, and when it went off, I said it looked like it blew Sergeant Niemeyer 10 foot above that, but I wasn't that. But I remember seeing his body going up above that elephant grass. Well, he wound up losing a leg over it. And matter of fact, he died, I think last year. He died last year. But, and I don't know, next thing I know, it was somebody pounding me on the back, and it's Sergeant Matos. And I'm standing there, standing up, and I got a 45 in each hand, and I could not tell you when and somebody said, "You mean you didn't know what you were doing?" I said, "No, 'cause at the time, if I had, I'd been down in that hole, And so he kept saying, he said, "I saw what you did, I saw what you did." And I don't know, when we finally, after they took us out, 3 days later, they took us to play coup. And the next day, the lieutenant came down and said that get our gear together, we was going to have to go back up there. Well, this is when the 2nd and 7th was getting. But General Knowles, who was the assistant to General Kennard at that time, he said, "No," he said, "you guys been chewed up too bad. We're going to have somebody else go." So I remember Westmoreland came to play coup and came down the ranks and shook everybody's hand. Good job, blah, 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 and all that good, stuff. But, of course, a lot of my friends, I had no idea where they were at until we got back to play coup, and finally found Sergeant Sewell, and he'd got shot in the anyway. And it was kind of like a roller coaster of emotions when we got back to Ankh. I was mad because a lot of my buddies had been killed. I was sad that they were killed. I was mad that they were killed. And I, of course, I was elated that I was still alive, but then again, come through that and not even get a scratch. I was guilty. I felt guilty, and it was just a roller coaster.
What did they say that you had done?
Well, it's right there. Anyway, when I was packing my duffel bag, get ready to go home, that's when Matos told me he's going to put me in for a Bronze Star. And I said, "Well, that's great, Sarge. I can take that at 35 cents when I get back home and buy a beer."
Would you read that?
Oh. All of it?
Well, that's it, the part that what you did.
It says,
that's your Silver Star, isn't it?
Yes, sir. It said, anyway, reason says, "For gallantry in action, Specialist 4 Parish distinguished himself on 15 November 1965 during a search and destroy operation in the Ia Drang Valley, Republic of Vietnam. Specialist Parish was operating an M60 machine gun on the defensive perimeter of his company when a numerically superior Viet Cong force launched an attack. As the insurgent forces attacked, Specialist 4 Parish delivered lethal fire into the advancing waves of the Viet Cong. When the hostile troops were within 20 meters of his position, his machine gun ran out of ammunition. With complete disregard for his personal safety, Specialist 4 Parish picked up two .45 caliber pistols, stood up in his position, and inflicted numerous casualties upon the approaching insurgents. Through his courage, determination, and devotion to duty, he saved the lives of many comrades who were in the vicinity of his position and contributing immeasurably to the defeat of the attacking Viet Cong. Specialist 4 Parish's unimpeachable valor and extraordinary heroism against a superior hostile force were in keeping with the highest tradition of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. And I feel kind of silly reading this.
Well, you're one of our heroes.
Like I told somebody, I said, hey, I was scared as anybody else up there, and anybody in that situation tells you they ain't scared, they either an idiot or a liar.
Someone asked me if I was scared. I said, no, I was too terrified to be scared.
There you go. There you go. But anyway, I came home, went back to work on the seismograph crew, and I'd met a girl my last leave home, and she and I wound up getting married, and so I quit my seismograph job, and we moved to Tulsa from Bristow, and I got a job working for Quick Trip, which at the time they only had like 20 stores, and I assistant manager one at 10th and Adams in Sand Springs, and I had left my grandmother's address as a forwarding address because my folks were in California at the time doing seismograph work. And my sister called me one day and she said, are you all coming down to Grandma's? And I said, yeah, when I get off work. And she said, well, you have a big manila envelope here. It says U.S. Army official business. I said, oh my God, they're calling me back, you know. And so she said, you want me to open it? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, well, there's a little box in here's got some kind of a medal in it. I said, I said, well, you know, Sergeant Mate, and this was in June of '66, about 6 months after I'd been home. And I said, well, Sergeant Mato said he was going to put me in for a Bronze Star. And she said, well, it looks kind of bronze, but I could hear my brother in the background. He said, well, this certificate deal here says it's a Silver Star. I thought, no, it can't be a Silver Star. And sure enough, when I got down there, and it was. But like I said, after going through that, I this is why I go and speak now. And like I told one group, I said, you know, I feel like now I'm fulfilling my military obligation, you know, because if I can tell some of you youngsters anything to help you get back home if you're fixing to deploy, then, hey, I'm doing my job now.
Tell me about the trip home.
Well, wasn't much to it. They Thanksgiving Day, they came and told us that we were going to fly down to Saigon and start processing out. So we go to the airstrip there at Don Cay and sit out there all day in the rain, and no planes come in because the clouds were low over the mountain around Don Cay. And so they brought out some deuce and a halfs and took us back to our company area, and of course we hadn't had anything to eat since that morning, and we had soup, chicken noodle soup and bread for Thanksgiving dinner. Then the next day they came in, flew us to Saigon. We were there about 3-4 days, and then they took us over Tan Snoot, and we loaded up on a Continental 707 and flew back. And we were supposed to land it in San Francisco, but they said they had protesters out there and stuff, so they diverted us to Oakland. And I got discharged there at Oakland, and my folks, like I said, were there in California down by Bakersfield, so they drove up that night. The girl that I wound up marrying, she had came out on the bus, and so they came up and picked me up that night and spent a couple of weeks there, and then I bought a car, and then my mom and my girlfriend drove back to Oklahoma.
When did you get your discharge?
The official one?
Yeah.
Gosh, it was like in 68, 69.
No, this one is dated October 14th, 65, and November 28th, 69.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
Yeah, well, see, they told me I had to join a reserve unit when I came back, and I went over to the draft deal over to re-register at Spalpa, and I was talking to this lady about it. She said, well, you know what, I wouldn't say anything till I heard from them, because she said, my husband and my son, two of my sons are joining reserves now, and they're only allowed so many, and they're filling up since this Vietnam thing is. So I never said anything, and next thing I heard from them was was supposed to go to a summer camp, and I was driving a propane truck at that time for my brother-in-law, and he wrote him a letter and said I was his only employee, and that, would put a hardship on him. So the next year, same thing, and I never did ever go to a camp or a reserve meeting, and then next thing I know, they sent me the.
Would you join the Army again?
If it came down to defending this country, yes, I would.
I'd like to do a word association. I'll give you some more. You give me a reaction.
Okay.
The first one is basic training.
Would I have to go through that again?
Fort Benning.
Fort Benning, I like home place.
Infantry.
Feet weary.
USNS Rose.
Oh, choppy.
Vietnam.
Hellhole.
You drank.
Sadness.
Hal Moore.
Great.
Ho Chi Minh.
I respect him.
Lyndon Johnson.
If they would have let us, my dad and I have talked about this. Looking back, we've never won a war of attrition. Every war we won was territorial. It's like I told Dad, y'all took an island, you secured it, you went to the next island, you secured it, and I said 2 weeks after I was home, it's right back up in the Yaw Drain, Hamburger Hill. 10 times they went up that thing. And what is it? Oh, well, and those people, 12 to 1 body count don't matter to nothing to them, and because they're dedicated. They, like I said, people look at me like I'm stupid, but the North Vietnamese Army was a very admirable foe. I mean, to come through that napalm and the bombings and stuff like that, that is dedication.
Richard Nixon.
Nah, I don't think he's a liar.
How do you want to be remembered?
As just a great dad to my 4 daughters.
Well, sir, this is an excellent interview.
Well, I don't know about that.
I want to thank you for your service and
Well,
thank you
Joe,
for the interview.
I'm just me. Like I said, I don't feel, that I did any more than what anybody else did up there. We were, like you said, we were just doing our jobs.
Yeah. And again, this is September 26th, 2017. My name is Joe Todd. This has been an interview with Willard Parish in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Thank you.
You're welcome.